I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Hart, and I'm the Chair of the Toronto Police Services Board. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Board. Although this meeting is taking place virtually, we acknowledge that the land we're on as we hold this meeting is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The Board also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. I will now ask if there are any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Seeing none, let me now turn this meeting over to Ryan Teschner, our Executive Director. Please, Ryan.
Thank you, Chair Hart, and thank you to everyone who has joined this virtual meeting. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed on the Toronto Police Service YouTube account and will be available there at the conclusion of this meeting. At this virtual meeting today, we have Chair Jim Hart, Vice Chair Councillor Francis Nunziata, Mayor John Tory, Councillor Michael Ford, Member Marie Molinar, Member Ainsworth Morgan, Member Lisa Kostakis, as well as members of our board office staff. At this virtual meeting today, we also have Chief Raymer, his command team, members of the service, and of course, members of the public. We have individuals who have registered to make deputations on our agenda items. As with our regular meeting process, deputations will be heard prior to the item being discussed and voted on by board members. When it comes time to do a deputation, those who have registered will be brought into the meeting by our colleague, Du Buchanan-Gisser. As always, deputants will speak, followed by an opportunity for board members to ask them questions. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Teschner. I'd now like to take this opportunity to recognize February as Black History Month, which we've celebrated since 1994. In Canada, Black History Month was officially established by an act of Parliament under the leadership of then Member of Parliament Jean Augustine and the Ontario Black History Society under the leadership of Rosemary Sadler and many others. At this time, we honor the outstanding contributions made by the Black community to our city, to our country, and to this police service. These contributions are incredibly powerful and enduring. It is critical to recognize the period of time we're living in, both locally and globally, as we reflect deeply on the state of police and community relations and figure out how we all move forward collectively together. We must also acknowledge that racism, including anti-Black racism, exists within all institutions. We must confront it, call it out in all its forms, dedicating ourselves to concrete and comprehensive action that puts us clearly on the path to change. The board understands the role it must play in leading such fundamental change and has prioritized the work arising from the 81 police reform recommendations approved at our August board meeting. We view these as first steps in a bigger and broader conversation, incremental movement as part of a much more significant shift in our approach to community safety. The board also recognizes that we, as board members, are not exempt from the need to continually educate ourselves on human rights and anti-Black racism, and that as a governing body, continuous knowledge development in this area is crucial. Indeed, this week, board members, as well as staff, completed the second phase of an anti-Black racism training program delivered by the service's Equity, Inclusion, and Human Rights Unit. These comprehensive half-day training sessions emphasize the importance of inclusive leadership and of applying an equity lens to all that we do, critically examining our policies and our processes and taking the current context into consideration. This is just the beginning, with more training still to come and more learning to incorporate into our decision-making and our policy development processes. In addition, at today's meeting, the board will be considering membership recommendations from the co-chairs of its Anti-Racism Advisory Panel, which has had a significant mandate to advise and support the board in relation to policing and racism, anti-Black racism, and anti-Indigenous racism. The work of ARAP will be critical moving forward on these critical issues, informing our training, policies, strategies, and action plans. This year, as we celebrate Black History Month, we acknowledge the challenges we are currently facing and the lived experiences that ground them. But we should also look forward with sincere hope as we continue to address how we can best deliver policing services in Toronto in genuine and meaningful partnership with our communities, including our Black communities. Events like Black History Month remind us of the incredible importance of our history and the celebration of past achievements, as well as the need to look to the future, paving the way forward together in true consultation with the public. Safe, healthy, and productive communities are the result of many individuals and groups coming together with a shared objective, working diligently in pursuit of a common goal. On behalf of the board, I join you all in commemorating Black History Month as we look forward together to a future of partnership, mutual trust, and collaboration. Mayor Tory, I believe you have a few words you'd like to say as well.
Well, just a very few, Chair, and you said it so well, but I feel that as a member of the board, but also, of course, as mayor, I've had a chance to be at probably so far a dozen or 15, without exaggeration, Black History Month events. And I've said the same thing at each one, which is that, not only is this an opportunity to look at what is an incredible record of Black achievement by Black Torontonians in the history of our city, going back not decades, but centuries, literally centuries. But I think 2021 represents a particular moment in time that you made a very direct reference to, which is that, after what is an unprecedented public consensus that was arrived at admittedly out of grief and frustration and anger at some things that happened in 2020 and had happened long before, we are on a path to achieve some real change. And that's not confined by any means to policing. There's a lot of stuff going on inside the City Hall. We had preceded last year's events by the establishment of a confronting anti-Black racism unit, which has taken some very definite steps, including a similar kind of training that I participated in. So I've had two sets of this, one from the police service and one from the city itself. But I just want to acknowledge these are only first steps, but I'm proud of the fact we've taken the first steps. And I'm very mindful of the fact that it isn't just people in Toronto that are watching because of the consensus they formed as to the need to rebuild trust and to take action, but it's people in other parts of the world. I mean, we are a magnet for people to want to come here, and we should want that to continue long into the future because I believe principally of the value set that they see, at the foundation of how we live here. And I think we probably get a little more credit than we deserve for that value set, but it is a great foundation upon which to build change and to be leaders in the world so that we can continue to be proud of how we live here, especially as it relates to eradicating anti-Black racism and all forms of racism and discrimination. And so the police are a significant part of that, only because of the central role and the incredible responsibilities we give to the men and women who serve in the police service and the function that they serve. And so I will be committed, as all board members are, I'm sure, to making sure we continue to move that agenda forward, rebuild trust where it's been eroded, and make sure it's on a solid foundation for the future. And Black History Month is an important time when we're reminded of that over and over again in many different ways. And every month should be Black History Month in a certain way, but this is the time when we, I think, recommit ourselves to doing what I know we're doing. So thank you, Chair, for your very thoughtful remarks. And I just want to associate myself with them as mayor, but also to say that I'm very committed personally to continuing to move forward on this agenda that we've embarked upon, which is ambitious. And we have to have a degree of patience with it because there are first steps that need to be taken, but it's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would any other board members like to say a few words before I move on? I can see everyone except for Ms. Molnar. Okay, I will now move forward through the agenda. Item number 1 is the confirmation of minutes for the special virtual public meeting held on January the 29th, 2021. That item is being held for deputation. Item number 2 is a presentation. It's the overview of the work of the Toronto Police Services Child Exploitation section, and that will be held for the presentation. Item number 3 is a report on the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel membership recommendations. I will be holding that item down. Item number 4 is the Member Wellbeing Strategy and Framework. That is being held down for deputations. Item number 5 is a Senior Officer Uniform Promotion, Superintendents and Inspectors. Can I have a motion to approve item number 5? Ms. Kostaka, seconded by Councillor Ford. All in favor? Any opposed? Item number 5 carries. Item number 6, extension of the approved temporary towing and impound cost recovery model due to COVID-19. Can I have a motion to approve item number 6? Vice Chair, seconded by Councillor Ford. All in favor? Any opposed? Item number 6 carries. Item number 7, approval of DNR Electronics as a vendor of record for police vehicle lights, sirens, and weapon mounts. Can I have a motion to approve item number 7? Mayor Tory, could I have a seconder? Councillor Ford, all in favor? Any opposed? Item number 7 carries. Item number 8 is special constable appointments and authorities. We have a deputation on item number 8, so that's being held down. I understand we also will have a motion on item number 8. Item number 9 is a quarterly report, occupational health and safety update for October the 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2020, and year-end summary. That's being held down for a deputation. Item number 10 is the annual report 2020 protected disclosure. Can I have a motion to receive item number 10? Councillor Ford, could I have a seconder? Vice Chair, all in favor? Any opposed? Item number 10 carries. Item number 11, annual report 2020 statistical report, Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Item number 11 is held down for a deputation. Item number 12 is the 2020 secondment listing. Could I have a motion to receive item number 12? Ms. Kostakis, seconded by Vice Chair Nunziata. All in favor? Any opposed? Item number 12 carries. Item number 13, annual report 2020 uniform promotions. Could I have a motion to receive item number 13? Vice Chair Nunziata, could I have a seconder? Could I have a seconder on number 13? Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any opposed? Item number 13 carries. Item number 14 is the annual report 2020 parking enforcement unit parking ticket issuance. Could I have a motion to approve item number 14? Ms. Kostakis, could I have a seconder? I have a seconder on item number 14, Vice Chair Nunziata. All in favor? Any opposed? Item number 14 carries. Item number 15 is the annual report 2020 summary of grievances. Could I have a motion to receive item number 15? Councillor Ford, could I have a seconder? Ms. Kostakis, all in favor? Any opposed? Item 15 carries. Item number 16, independent civilian review into missing persons investigations, account for professional services. We have a written deputation on that item from Nicole Corrado. I want to thank her for her written deputation. Can I have a motion to receive item number 16?
I will so move, Chair, but could I just ask that our Executive Director make a note in anticipation of this report coming fairly soon, that we also sort of figure out how we're going to deal with it. In other words, it's not just one of those things where we'll receive it one day and have a motion to receive. So if the Executive Director could just make a note of how we'll deal with it, because I think it's going to be a groundbreaking report just based on what it covers and how important it is. So that's all. But I'll be happy to move this item.
And Mayor Tory, to your question, we are working on that.
Thank you.
So Mayor Tory has moved to receipt. Could I have a seconder? Councillor Ford, all in favor? Any opposed? Item number 16 carries. Item number 17, which includes item 17.1 through 17.7, which is the Chief's Administrative Investigation reports. Could I have a motion to receive all of those reports listed under item number 17? Councillor Ford, could I have a seconder? Ms. Kostakis, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Okay, now we will go back to the top of the agenda, which is the confirmation of minutes from the special virtual meeting held on January the 29th, 2021. We have a deputation of Mr. Langefeld, who also, I understand, has a slide deck that we will be showing, and that slide deck has been uploaded to our website. So Mr. Langefeld can know that. And whenever Mr. Langefeld is ready, please put him on.
Hi, Chris. Just a second while we set things up. Chris, you should be receiving a prompt from the system now to unmute. You need to press *6.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Just a second. All right, we're ready to launch.
Let me know when you
Go ahead.
Okay. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. Thank you, board members. In April 2020, we had the situation of Mayor Tory and the Toronto Police Service honoring healthcare workers by, the report here from CTV News is paraded down University Avenue. And of course, we understand we'd all like to be honoring health workers. We appreciate their efforts, and everybody would like to be out there showing them our support. However, in April 2020, the law said no person shall attend a parade. And that was active from March till May. And so although the law said no parades were allowed, the mayor and the police service and other first responders were out there ignoring that law, and of course it wasn't enforced. In addition, now we have the current lockdown, the current provincial shutdown laws effective from January, and that says a business or organization shall ensure that any person who performs work for the business or organization conducts their work remotely. Yet I note that a number of people, even now, we see here, are working from their offices when we know they could be working from home. Some of them have been under lockdown and been able to do it. But the case is that police don't enforce the laws against government officials, but they are enforcing them against the public. Now, we look back to the Toronto Police, of course, had the issue of the G20 in 2010, and 2 years later, we got recommendations where the board had to go to Justice Morden to have him explain the role of the board. And he said the board should determine objectives, priorities, and policies for organizationally significant issues. I would suggest there are a few things other than a pandemic that could be organizationally significant. As well, the board is instructed to receive information on any training and to work together to develop training materials. And we're not seeing that happen right now. The board is instructed by Justice Morden that its role is to create a comprehensive policy on crowd control and mass demonstrations. That means protesting. And that comprehensive policy was never created. Some of the others were, but that wasn't. And protesting is covered under our charter. Section 2, the top of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, puts freedom of expression, freedom of the press, peaceful assembly and association as the top of our rights. And yet currently police are saying, no, you can't do that because of COVID. Also under the charter is the equality before and under the law. We're all supposed to be treated equally. But I think it's clear that that isn't the case, and that certain people, those that choose to protest, are subject to a very different set of rules than particularly police and politicians seem to be subjected to. We know as well, Justice Morden recommended to the police board that their role should be to provide names, badges, and badge numbers. They came up with a policy for that, but as you see from this photo, you don't see those names. What you see is a line of Model A1s with blue chins and black tops are what faced people, and if they have a problem, that's what they report. I was attacked by an A1. The board also has the responsibility to communicate legislative changes to the public. It is the board's job to be telling the public about enforcement of these rules, and that's not how police on a megaphone doesn't qualify. There's supposed to be a complete operational plan, and we certainly haven't seen that in the case of COVID. And there's supposed to be board guidance on unique operational requirements. And certainly a global pandemic, a once-in-a-lifetime experience, qualifies as a unique operational requirement. In summary, when COVID emergency orders first appeared here in Toronto, we heard lots of talk about how police were going to act reasonably and responsibly and rationally. That police would inform the public of requirements rather than employing force to dominate and control. Now we see the reality, and it's the opposite of those initial promises. We see police openly participating in and ignoring infractions by the rich and powerful. Meanwhile, officers employ violence and criminal arrest, where this public health crisis calls for enforcement to end with fines, not arrest. And with compassion, public education, and public discourse first and foremost. That imbalance, that failure, that excessive force of law enforcement, tyranny which is almost exclusive to Toronto, is the failure of the Toronto Police Services Board to fulfill their statutory responsibilities. Board members have sworn to uphold the Charter. Reality is the board restricts even virtual access to police governance, while officers simultaneously suppress protests in the streets.
Okay, Mr. Langenfeld, I'll have to wrap you up. You're at 5:30 now. Thank you very much for your deputation. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Before I ask board members if they have any questions of you, I'm going to ask the Chief to speak on some of your comments. Chief Raymer, could you weigh in, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I do have some comments. Let me first say that the people of Toronto have been well served by the women and men of the Toronto Police Service throughout this pandemic. Policing during the pandemic poses special challenges, and our people have risen to those challenges. When the pandemic was first declared and the province enacted laws designed to contain the spread of the virus, we immediately assured our members were well versed in the requirements of the provincial laws and the municipal bylaws. They've been kept abreast of all changes to the laws as they were either amended or extended. At first, our focus was attempting to secure compliance with the law by education, counseling, and convincing. This continued for quite some time. Indeed, we faced some criticism over the course of the last summer by some members of the public for counseling and not enforcing. Nonetheless, we continued on only enforcing as a last resort. However, as the virus spread even more quickly, and particularly when more transmissible variants started to appear in Toronto, we were convinced that the time had come to enforce, not blindly, but with discretion. We are now enforcing much more than we had been. Frankly, I do not think that the Deputant speaks for the majority of the people of Toronto. In fact, I believe that the vast majority of the people of Toronto want us to enforce. They want the pandemic to end as soon as possible, and they rightly see these mass gatherings as a danger of spreading the virus, as most of us obey the public health orders and the law. The demonstrations that we see in Toronto virtually every weekend are only new in respect to the topic that is the subject of the protest and the fact that they are occurring during a pandemic. The TPS is well trained in managing mass demonstrations and protests. Part of that training are the rights of the citizen. Also part of that training are the rights of the public. No one right takes absolute precedence over the other. In Canada, the law requires us to balance rights. Right now, the balance favors more enforcement. These demonstrations or protests do not simply represent a threat to public health. They represent a threat to public safety. The laws are there to protect the whole of society, and we will enforce the laws in such a way that the Charter is complied with, of course, but we must protect the public. The criminal law indeed provides penalties for behavior that endangers the lives and safety of the people, and in the right circumstances, we have laid those charges, and we will continue to do so. In respect of these demonstrations, as with all demonstrations, we identify the organizers of these events, and we reach out to them ahead of time. We counsel and caution them. We do that again on the day of the event. And now, when they break the law, they will be charged. These events are policed by members of our divisional crew teams, community response units, and they are supported when necessary by our public safety unit. Our goal in these efforts is to secure compliance in order to protect the public. Our people are very well trained, they are very experienced, and they are very good at it. The landscape has changed since March 2020, so little can be gained from discussing what we said back then in response to a virus that we really didn't know and a danger that had not yet fully disclosed itself. So I end where I started. The people of Toronto are well served by the members of the TPS and will continue to be. And with that, Chair, I'd also like to have Alison come on from our Corporate Communications Director, just to speak to some of the public messaging that has been done on behalf of the service to the public. Alison, if you could jump in, please.
Yes, thank you, Chief. So the Toronto Police Service has been taking both a proactive and responsive approaches to informing the public as we've evolved over the months from education and awareness, as the Chief outlined, and into a more enhanced enforcement of late, most specifically around the province's declaration of the second emergency measure. January 14th, we issued a news release that outlined, a very comprehensive news release that outlined what the public could expect from the police approach to enforcement around the emergency order. There had been a lot of questions at that time in the media and from the public. And so we took a couple of days to put together a very comprehensive message that we also put out on social media. And Deputy Demkew did a video that we also put out on social media. And so that was really to help the public understand that we were moving from education awareness into enhanced enforcement and what they could expect in any engagement with a police officer around the ROA and the EMCPA. It's important to note that we have been complementing our communications with public health and City of Toronto messaging to ensure that the public hears from us directly. And we've done that through media relations, variety of spokespeople, including corporate communications media officers on a daily basis. Of course, Chief Raymer has done multiple media interviews and some videos and some messaging on his social media, as well as Deputy Demkew is engaged with media and, as I mentioned, on social media as well. And really just underlining the important parts, what's important at the time, whether it's stay at home, increased mask wearing, and of course, gathering rules. We've also had a robust social media campaign, and particularly from January on with the enhanced enforcement, where we had specialized graphics, where we were advising people, mostly from Thursday to Sunday when we knew the gatherings were to be happening, to let them know if they attend these events, what they can expect from the officers on the ground and what the orders require of citizens attending. So we've had media relations quite extensive. Our officers have been participating in the news conferences with the city at least once, sometimes twice a week. We've issued about 15 news releases over the last number of months outlining our enforcement, whether it's fines or arrests, or also just outlining transitional changes to our enforcement in relation to changes to the ROA or the EMCPA. We have a public website where we have a frequently asked questions document that we keep up to date with everything regarding COVID and legislation. We've had about 76,000 views to that page, which has also been helpful for our public. So I think I will leave it at that unless there's any questions.
First of all, Chief and Allison, thanks for such a comprehensive answer. Before we go to questions of the Chief, I'm just going to ask board members if they have any questions of the Deputant, Mr. Langenfeld. Questions of Mr. Langenfeld? Mayor Tory?
I don't have a question, Mr. Chair, but I just want to make a brief statement, and sort of really in response to what the Chief said, and that is to say that I thank Mr. Langenfeld, because I think when he comes forward with his deputations, I don't always agree with them, of course, but I think he always thinks about them very carefully. And I would only say this, which is that had I known Mr. Langenfeld, not me, but had people known that he was going to come forward and make that deputation about the way in which the police have carried out their job during the pandemic, there probably would have been someone else who could have come in and made exactly the case on the other side, which is the police haven't been aggressive enough, or whatever the right word is, in laying enough charges in the face of a public health emergency. I'm in a unique position, both as a board member, but also more so as mayor, to be answerable for all this. And even though I don't direct law enforcement, Mr. Langenfeld implies maybe that as board members we should be, which I don't think that's what he really means. But where I have sat and listened for the whole of the year almost now that the pandemic has been going on, to people who will write emails and otherwise approach us and say we're having too much law enforcement, and others who would argue that we're not having enough. And so I think when I hear that, and I hear it roughly in balance, I sort of come to the conclusion that in the very difficult decisions that men and women on the police service have to exercise their discretion, as they do on all matters every day, that they've actually done a really good job of achieving the right balance in terms of the enforcement versus education versus other different ways in which they have to carry out their duty. And so I want to say that I think the people of Toronto have confidence, as the chief said, have confidence in that how that has been done, that they see it as having been done in a balanced way, and that there are probably two groups that you hear from, one say too little and one say too much, and that suggests to me, since I hear from them, I do as mayor in roughly equal measure, that the police have achieved just about the right place. And there are always going to be aberrations from that, but I just want to say that I have confidence in how they've carried out their job in what is an absolutely unprecedented public health emergency that we've had that is still going on. So I thank them for that. We will continue to oversee them and listen to what the public has to say, including Mr. Langenfeld. But I want to say overall, I think that they've done a very excellent job.
But I'd point out the reality is that the board has the statutory responsibility, and Justice Morton has told you that it is the board's responsibility to develop policy on this. And as you say, if the board had a meeting on this, there would be other voices. And all I'm asking for is the board to hold a meeting and let those voices speak so that we can hear from the people that have a vested interest in this so that they can present their arguments. I don't necessarily agree with the protests, but protesting is a right, and it's not something police get to decide for themselves. It's something the board is supposed to make the decision on. That's what the law says, and that's what Justice Morton told you. Thank you.
Board members, any questions for Mr. Langenfeld before I ask for questions of the chief? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Langenfeld, as always, for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Board members, any questions of the chief or Allison on this item? Seeing none, I just want to echo, Chief, the mayor's comments that during extremely exceptional times, the men and women of the Toronto Police Service have stepped up and done a fantastic job, as they do each and every day. So I want to thank you, Chief, for such a comprehensive answer, and Allison, thank you as well for letting the Torontonians, first of all, know exactly the great work that you're doing, but I believe that most Torontonians know that already. And thank you so much, Chief. Now, can I have a motion to approve the minutes, item number 1? I can see everyone except for Ms. Molinar. Mr. Morgan, seconded by Ms. Kostakis. All in favor? Any opposed? Item number 1 carries. We will now move over to item number 2, which is the overview of the work of the Toronto Police Service's Child Exploitation section. We have a presentation. With us today, we have Superintendent Pauline Gray, Inspector Justin Vanderheyden, and PC Amy Davey. So when you're ready, please start, Superintendent. Welcome.
Good morning. I'm going to introduce to you Inspector Justin Vanderheyden and Detective Constable Amy Davey. Justin is the officer in charge of sex crimes, and Amy is a participant in child exploitation, which falls under that pillar. And I will have a few words to say at the end of the presentation, but for now, I leave you to them.
Thank you, Superintendent. Amy, if you could put the slide deck up, we'll share a very short slide deck with the participants. Okay. Good morning, Chief Raymer, Chair Hart, Command, and board members. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to speak with you today on the work carried out by this very important unit. My name is Inspector Justin Vanderheyden, and as the Superintendent said, I'm the Unit Commander of the Toronto Police Service's Sex Crimes Unit. I'm joined today by the Superintendent and Detective Constable Amy Davey, who's one of our members in Child Exploitation. Our Child Exploitation section was formed in 2001 and is one of 4 main subsections within the Sex Crimes Unit. With 20 full-time members, the unit is the largest municipal child exploitation unit in the country, and I would suggest it's probably as large as some of the provincial or even the federal. These units are often referred to as ICE squads, which would stand for Internet Child Exploitation. Our unit consists primarily of specialized investigators who are supported by in-house forensic technological crime officers and a dedicated analyst. Next slide, Amy. I'm going to give you a rundown of some of the investigations, types of investigations that we get involved in. Many of our investigations' primary focus is on imagery that depicts sexual acts involving children, or when the dominant characteristic of the imagery is the sexual organs or anal regions of the children. I want to stop for a moment and talk about the term child pornography. Just one second. The term child pornography is a colloquial, if not somewhat out-of-date term that's not really an accurate depiction of the victimization of children. By definition, the word pornography infers consenting participants, which obviously cannot be the case with children. As such, our investigators use the more accurate term of child sexual abuse material, or CSAM for short. Having said this, the criminal code offenses refer to the term child pornography, so in that context, we must continue to use this term in our indictments and our applications for warrants. Next slide. Luring is one of the another type of investigation we get involved in. The vast majority of luring cases occur online with very few in-person luring attempts. They're very rare. With the ubiquity of online social media platforms and games, the potential to make contact with children is almost limitless now. Often abusers will pose as younger children themselves to lure victims to share images, information, and in some cases to attempt to meet them in real life. Undercover operations are very effective in some of these investigations with the goal of arranging to meet the abuser, in essence, luring them out of the virtual world so they can be identified and charged. Next slide. Another area of concern is called sextortion. It's a fairly new area of growth among children and teens. After being convinced under the guise of some sort of a private arrangement to share intimate images with another person, children and teens can share images, after which a ransom demand is made to pay the person to prevent the images from being made public. In this case, in this investigation type, the motivation is profit. Next slide. This is a number of the other types of investigations we get involved in. Voyeurism is fairly self-explanatory, covertly observing and recording children without their knowledge or consent. The second is agreement made to traffic children for sex, often investigated. These are investigated using undercover operators to lure offenders to meet and be arrested. This is also a big overlap for our human trafficking section within sex crimes as well. Exposing children to sexual abuse material. This is often done in an effort to desensitize or groom children to be sexually victimized themselves. This next is also another growing concern for us, non-consensual distribution of imagery. This is an area where social media often plays a role in this. Sometimes referred to as revenge porn in the adult space. Images can be originally recorded with consent under the belief that they will be kept private, but later shared out of spite or anger once a relationship dissolves. Now, this differs slightly from the sextortion crime because the motivation in this case would be done to hurt or humiliate, not to generate money. And the last point there is child self-exploitation, and this involves the children inadvertently sharing sexual abuse material of themselves, often not being aware of the legality or the consequences. And we get involved in these cases occasionally, and they're fairly easy to rectify, with our investigators usually having a safety talk with the child and the family and arranging to have the images removed from the online world. Next slide. It's often asked where we get most of our investigations from, and I can tell you the electronic service providers are legally obligated to examine their servers for child sexual abuse materials and report any instances to law enforcement. Many of these massive companies, such as Google, Facebook, YouTube, what have you, are based in the United States, so a great deal of our information comes from American companies, but really have come from a wide range of countries across the globe. Next slide. CyberTip is .ca is a Canadian child exploitation tip line. It's based out of Winnipeg. We get some of our information from CyberTip, as well as, of course, our very successful Crime Stoppers program here in Toronto. Now, this pie chart actually is very informative because it gives you an idea of the magnitude of the workflow that we get from the electronic service providers. Based on this snapshot there out of 4 months at the end of last year, 9 out of 10 of our child exploitation cases were generated from electronic service providers. Crime Stoppers and CyberTip, as you can see, account for about 8% combined, and the email and other categories account for only 6%, and that includes a wide variety of unique sources of information, including radio calls or traditionally citizen-reported occurrences. Next slide. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we've got a number of highly trained specialists and subject matter experts within child exploitation. Some of the investigative techniques that are used are covert, and as such, we've only discussed those that are in the public domain already, or cases that are concluded or have otherwise been reported. At this point, I'd like to hand over the balance of the presentation to Detective Constable Amy Davey. Detective Constable Davy's been a member of the Toronto Police Service for 18 years, and she's spent 9 of those within the Child Exploitation Unit here. She's been involved in countless child exploitation investigations, and she's developed international partnerships and provides training to a wide variety of audiences, both here in Canada and abroad. Amy? I think you're muted, Amy.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today on the great work that our unit does here. It is a very specialized unit and it does very rewarding work. Within our unit, we do have specialized officers. Some of these officers include undercover officers who work within the dark web and undercover officers who work in the open web. And to give you a quick explanation of the dark web, it is similar to the open web, the web that the majority of us use, but the dark web is built to maintain people's privacy and in fact keep them anonymous. The dark web is impossible to track, and we have a lot of cases where people doing illegal activities such as trading CSAM material or child abuse material will be using the dark web. We also have child forensic interviewers, and we have a victim identification officer, which is what I do, which is looking for victims through images and videos of CSAM, of the abuse, trying to pick out clues and locate victims around the world from there. We have many international partners, and this is because in our unit, unlike others, we are working with the internet, and the internet has no border. So for us, international partnership is very important, and we're often involved in projects that are international in nature. One project that we've worked on in 2019 and 2020 was Project Frostbite, and the goal of this project was to identify users on the dark web who were sexually abusing children and then sharing that material to others on this website. Similar to the open web, on the dark web, you can have websites, but they aren't indexed, meaning you can't find them unless you know what you're looking for. And these dark websites are similar to something like Facebook, where a user can create a profile, share images, comment on images. It just so happens that these websites are commenting on illegal child pornography material. In this project, we were able to track a male living in Ontario who was actually the administrator of one of these sites dedicated to sharing child abuse material. This male was located in Ontario, and eventually, with the help of Europol and Homeland Security in the United States, we were able to arrest him, secure evidence, obtain valuable intelligence. He himself had 4 child victims, and because of his arrest, we were able to rescue many other children. And also, where there's child victims, there are suspects. Those suspects were also arrested. Within our office, we've seen annual increases in occurrences. That means cases that are coming into our office. This has a number of reasons. First of all, everyone has increased access to personal devices, increased access to the internet, and the increased ability to connect worldwide. There's also an increase based on the fact that these agencies that are reporting instances of child pornography are becoming more efficient in how they report to police. All of these combined has seen a dramatic increase in the amount of cases coming into our unit. In a 6-year span, 2015 to 2020, we've seen a 73% increase in the number of occurrences coming into the child exploitation section. In that same time period, we've seen a 46% increase in arrests. And myself and Inspector Vanderheyden are happy to answer any questions you may have.
So Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Superintendent.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you both to Amy and Inspector Vanderheiden. I think that to say that the work done by child exploitation is invaluable is in fact an understatement. But like child exploitation, other units within sex crimes, that being the Child and Youth Advocacy Center and human trafficking, are all hidden crimes. Not only in the fact that they occur on the internet, in people's homes, and in hotel rooms, but the fact that the vast majority, in fact, as you saw by the pie chart, all but a few are actually initiated by our external partners or by proactive work done by the officers themselves. They are not generated by radio calls and, as a result, are not captured as emergencies or calls for service. And I think given the totality of their work and the type of the work being the exploitation of children and child abuse material, I can't imagine that there could be a higher priority call than what they do. Thank you for that.
Thank you for those comments, Superintendent. Board members, any questions? I'll start with Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the officers for presenting this to the board. A very difficult topic, but you know the work in this area, you know, is commendable, and you guys, I'm sure, make a huge difference to many people with the work that you do. The other day, we heard the provincial government announce a new legislation. I think it was centered around human trafficking. Does that kind of impact the work that you guys are doing in any way?
I'm happy to answer that, Councillor. The human trafficking announcement by the provincial government was specific to the human trafficking field, and that is another one of my subunits. It does not provide funding or support for the child exploitation side directly, but I will tell you that, as I mentioned, the trafficking of children is often discovered through the child exploitation investigations, and at that point, the two units work collaboratively. So it would be an indirect support, but the announcement on earlier this week was specific to our human trafficking child exploitation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then I guess my second question would be around how your unit works with the private sector, because you know everyone's on Facebook, Instagram, and all these social media apps. How, I guess it's really in depth. I guess there could be a million questions here, but how do you work with the private sector to identify child exploitation? And I guess because they're American companies, a lot of them, how does that relationship work, being Canadian law enforcement?
I'll start off and I'll let Amy fill in the gaps, and Superintendent Gray. Actually, the legislation is extremely powerful, and not just Canadian, but American, but international legislation is extremely powerful. These companies have to enter into these agreements to do their business. So they're actually incredible social partners, and they get, like I said, they give us 9 out of 10 of our tips. So that flow is constant, and it's been incredibly seamless, actually, to the point where there's an abundance of it, unfortunately. But that's not just the Americans and Canadian service providers, but that's international as well. Amy, can you add some more to that?
I think that we have an incoming relationship with these electronic service providers. They are providing us with reports. We are not giving them anything. If we want something, then we're seeking judicial authorization to get anything more in relation to an investigation that they give us. So really, it's about them giving us information when there is illegal material found on their site, and then us seeking judicial authorization to receive more.
All right, and then just my last question. So there's been, of course, an increase on demand on your unit. Have we been able, as a board and a service, to invest adequately to meet the demands of your unit?
I'll take that one. So we are, a large portion of the funding for the unit is provincially funded because we are, to Amy's point, we are a borderless unit. The work is global. And to your previous question, not only do we have unbelievable help from our private partners, I will tell you that the one thing, regardless of ideology in policing, that we all agree on is child exploitation. And whether they're working with their Russian counterparts or their South African counterparts, we have unbelievable cooperation with policing agents around the world. As far as resources, you know, I can tell you, we could always use more. I think that's a given. To Amy's point, it is unfortunately a growth industry. We are very lucky. I'm a bit of a proud mom. I think we have the best unit probably in the world. I can tell you that when it's not COVID, sometimes I have a hard time keeping their bums in chairs because they are so coveted as speakers and trainers. We really do.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if the issue's on my end, but I can't hear Superintendent.
No, I think the superintendent froze.
Yeah, she dropped it.
We may have lost her for a bit.
Well, she didn't freeze. The record will show, Mr. Chair, but the internet froze.
Yes. Good correction, Mr. Mayor. Any other questions from board members? And hopefully the superintendent will get back. Mr. Morgan, I see your hand first, then Ms. Kostakis, and then Vice Chair Data.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I guess I have two questions. One, this work, as I'm sure you're well aware of, is incredibly important, but also recognize the tremendous psychological impact it can have on your team. So I was just wondering what's in place to sort of to support, monitor those particular needs so that they don't fall victim to any sort of psychological or mental distress. So I'm just wondering if there's any sort of checks and balances that are within your unit that supports that.
Yeah, I'm happy to start because Amy can finish off with her experience. But I can tell you we have a very robust wellness program here at the service, and nowhere greater than within child exploitation and sex crimes as a whole. We have psychological services actually on our floor here at headquarters, and all of our members have regular scheduled appointments. Just as a check-in, and if they don't need anything, then that's fine. But it's not like a critical incident anywhere on the road. If an officer is involved in an incident, they will go and have a debrief. Our officers all do that a number of times a year, and of course, they are only about 100 feet down the hall from us. And I pay attention as a unit commander extraordinarily closely to the wellness of our members. And if anybody decides that this work isn't for them anymore, that's their last day on the unit, and there's no stigma attached to that, and they go on to other things because their wellness is important. And you quite rightly say, the content of the work that they absorb every day, and I'm talking long days, is something that would break an average human being. But I can tell you that the resounding feeling that I see among all of our child exploitation investigators is an unbelievable commitment. And you heard Amy use the word rescue. That is the word that keeps all of them going. And so they are always looking at the next rescue of a child. Amy, what does it feel like from your end?
I think that membership wellness really stems from the management. And I know in our office, our managers are always looking out for us, suggesting days off if we need them. And of course, as Justin said, we have mandatory 6-month meetings with a psychiatrist here on the 3rd floor of headquarters. And I think that the majority of us feel like if we really needed help, the help is there. And also that our supervisors are open to hearing our concerns.
Well, thank you very much for that. And just a quick follow-up, because I know, I think two things. One, I'm in the educational sector, and when you're working with young people and children that are quite vulnerable, we're held to a really high standard. So I know within, and the same thing for policing. So when you come across a situation where unfortunately it's someone in law enforcement, is there an additional is that handled any different from any other sector, given that there are, if it is someone within law enforcement that is a perpetrator of this sort of heinous material?
Amy, you definitely have much more face-to-face contact with the children, so you jump in.
Absolutely. Just to be clear, you're asking if the investigation changes, if it is the suspect is a member of the police service?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's handled any differently, given that their level of I guess responsibility, or particularly because I'm within education, there is a different level of I guess with not necessarily punishment, but in terms of how this situation is handled, given that we are access to real vulnerable individuals, and there's a higher standard placed on that sort of profession. So I'm wondering within policing if they would be treated just as any other quote unquote suspect in these sort of situations.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that. I'm happy to jump in on that. We have occasionally over the years had contact or had members or of our service or other services be involved, and I couldn't tell you how many, but the number is very small. And it's treated no differently. As a matter of fact, like you said, we are held to a higher standard. We have an entire department, professional standards, that gets involved immediately if there's any inference that a member of our service or another is involved. So those are treated extraordinarily seriously. Not that they aren't all, but they definitely are taken care of.
Thank you.
Ms. Kosakis?
Thank you. Good morning. I was just wondering, and I'm going to wear my hat from the social service, being a social worker, and running a nonprofit agency and working with children and youth, and also our Boys and Girls Clubs across the city of Toronto, and a lot of the marginalized neighborhoods, obviously, are neighborhood improvement areas. And we're wondering, sometimes we don't have, I guess, the capacity at times too for the skill sets to be able to identify. We are working in prevention of gangs, and we're finding with gang recruitment, because gangs are really brilliant at using really the same engagement tools as we all do in belonging, et cetera, to recruit young people, and especially over the internet and social media. And that leads a lot. We're seeing a rise in our stats that we're keeping and tracking of trends of trafficking, especially with young girls as well, who are joining gangs more frequently now, because stereotypically people look at it, it's just male run, but there's a lot of females as well. But aside from that, there's males and females that are being trafficked and sexually exploited. So does the service have any form of resources that we can access as agencies that work with youth and children to receive some of that training and identifying where those risk indicators may be with some of our children and youth, that we could identify and work together, whether it's with our divisions or whatnot, in assisting in prevention of further trafficking or sexual exploitation? Are there any resources available that we could access in our sector from TPS for training opportunities for our staff and ourselves in moving forward and helping each other in the preventative measures, or at least the harm reduction of sexual exploitation of children and youth?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. We are amazing at partnering. I'll tell you right now, in all the subsections that work in sex crimes, we have more public-private partnerships and NGOs involved in support and training than I've ever seen in any other unit in my 25 years. So please contact me directly, and I will be able to funnel you to the unit, whether it's human trafficking or the CYAC, which is a Child and Youth Advocacy Center, who are partnered with Boost, who are partnered with the Sick Kids, who are partnered with Children's AIDS. We have more resources than I can imagine that you'd ever need. So please contact me directly, and I can give you a specialist in any one of those units.
Great. Thank you so very much. I just think it's important for, the right hand and the left hand, because all of us have specific resources at hand and ways to reach out to the families, and also the families of the children and youth, and especially a lot of our single parent homes that don't have that capacity or support system. So thank you. I'll do that.
Thank you. Vice Chair Nunziata.
Yes, thank you. As far as the origin of investigations for the tip line, do you have a breakdown on what percentage is on the tip line and the Crime Stoppers?
Not as part of this slide deck, but I can certainly get it. And the numbers are fairly small, so that shouldn't be a big ask.
Oh, so they're fairly small. Okay. So you mentioned when Councillor Ford asked the question about funding, the majority is from the province. So how much does the province fund?
It's a ongoing grant that seems to, it's almost in perpetuity, but it forms a portion, and I would say a significant portion of our annual operating budget. At last review of our budget, I think it's under $1 million annually. Okay,
thank you to that. So I'm looking at the occurrences from 2015 and 20. So 73% increase. That's very drastic. And then 46% increase in arrests, which congratulations to that. So the arrests, are they in Ontario, the arrests, or do you have the breakdown of the arrests?
All of those arrests we referred to are in Toronto, actually.
Oh, so all 46 arrests are in Toronto?
Yeah, or offenses that were committed in Toronto and the offender may live in a bordering community.
Very good. Okay, well, Toronto. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other members have questions? I've just got a couple of comments. First of all, thanks so much for your presentation and the terrific work you do each and every day. I think it's really important for people to hear about this topic for a variety of reasons, but also given the amount of investigative work that's involved. There's been a lot of talk about 911 calls recently and responding to calls, but proactive policing like this, which is also exceedingly time-consuming policing, doesn't really get the kind of notoriety, frankly, that it deserves. And I want to thank you for that. When I visited your unit a number of months ago now, given the pandemic, one of the things I heard was not only exceptional work that you do in Toronto, but it was mentioned earlier that the TPS is actually world leaders in this space. And I think the superintendent said it's hard to keep your bums in seats because people want you all over the world. And I think that's an important thing to repeat. When the TPS is a world leader in something, as we are in many things, I think we can't say that enough. And I know the TPS typically doesn't like to boast about things. So I will repeat it, that you are world leaders in this space, and that's absolutely terrific. The conversation, you have to wonder, I guess, a question that has crossed my mind, as a parent. My kids are grown now, but as a parent, what more can parents do to protect their children against this? Do you have any advice that you can state now for anyone listening? What more can people do?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your comments. I'm definitely going to pass this over to Amy because Amy gave me advice as a parent as well a number of years ago. So I took it. So Amy.
Well, my children are just small, so I haven't tested this out in their teen years. But one of the things that we often tell our parents involved in our investigations is that your child should never be in their bedroom or bathroom alone with their device, and that if they're going to use the device, it should be used in the common areas of the house. And we say that because bad things aren't going to happen in the living room, or bad pictures aren't going to happen in the living room while mom and dad are making dinner. But when they're behind closed doors is when some bad decisions can be made. That's one of our biggest tips for parents. We also have phone contracts here that are available if anyone would like one. What it is it goes through a list of things that your child will do and agree to when they're getting their phone. They have to sign it, the parent signs it, and that's their contract in order to keep their phone.
That's great advice. Thank you. I'm now going to turn over to the chief. I think you have some wrap-up comments, Chief.
Yes, thank you, Chair. No, I just wanted to mention that Superintendent Gray actually oversees our specialized criminal investigations, which includes the sex crime unit, of course, the homicide squad, the hold-up squad, and our forensic identification unit. And it's really part of the modernization process, and it creates opportunities to support priorities amongst the different units. So it's just, I just wanted to give the board and the public actually a little bit of understanding of those responsibilities and how it's part of our modernization process.
Thanks very much, Chief. I'll now bring it to the board. I assume there are no more questions. I'll now ask for a motion to receive the presentation. Could I have a motion to receive? Vice Chair Nunziata, could I have a seconder? Mayor Tory, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. We'll now move on to item number 3, which is an item that I held down. That's the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel membership recommendations. I held it down simply, and I will be turning this over to Mr. Morgan and Mr. Morgan shortly. But I held this down simply to thank both Mr. Ainsworth Morgan, our board member, and Mr. Anthony Morgan for agreeing to co-chair ARAP. It is certainly no small task, but I know as a board we're in extremely exceptional hands, and I know that the individuals that they have selected to accompany them on ARAP are top-notch individuals, and we look to you to assist the board in much change to come. And I want to thank you for agreeing to take on this work, because it is no small task. But I know myself and the board couldn't have picked 2 better board chairs. So I now turn it over to both of you for comment. And Mr. Anthony Morgan, since you are a visitor to the board, I will turn it over to you first, followed by Mr. Ainsworth Morgan. So Morgan squared, first one up.
Just checking in to make sure I can be heard. All right.
Yes.
Well, of course, after the year that we saw in 2020, upswing in conversation and interest in seeing fair and more accountable policing, we saw City Council step forward, and of course, the Toronto Police Services Board step forward by a number of recommendations that were falling in line with many of the calls for more equitable, transparent, fair, and anti-racist outcomes when it comes to policing. And so when myself and Ainsworth Morgan, and I should note we're of no relation, it's just a coincidence, when we were having conversations
Morgan,
and thinking about how to...
Mr. Morgan, I don't want to interrupt, but you're breaking up quite a bit. I don't know if other members are having...
Oh, am I?
Well, you may want to try turning off your camera. I know that might be better. I'm not sure. I don't want you to do that, but I don't want you to break up either. Other members experiencing the same thing?
Is this a bit better?
Yeah,
I apologize for that.
I think you're still breaking up.
No, we're able to hear.
It might be best for me to turn over to Mr.
No, Anthony, we can hear you. I think it's, yeah, we can hear you with the camera off. So just try again.
I think that's clear now. Yeah.
Okay. I apologize for that, folks. But ultimately, what I was speaking to is that this is an opportunity for us as a city to demonstrate a kind of leadership that I think many cities across the world are looking to see. And I think we're going to end up being an example of what more civilian accountability can look like in a way that is responsive to the needs and concerns of not just Black communities, but racialized communities, people living with mental health challenges, Indigenous communities, and also anybody who is seeking a deeper sense of justice and fair outcomes in a global city and complex city like ours. Myself and Mr. Morgan, of course, spent many hours thinking about what the mix of folks would be needed to ensure that we were not just thinking about the needs and interests of Black communities, which are longstanding when it comes to seeking justice, in areas of policing, but also thinking about the experiences of Indigenous communities, South Asian communities, people living with mental health issues. And so, to the best that we could in a large city and as diverse and complex as ours, we tried to make sure that we got the balance of the right skills, the right experience, the right approach and thinking about how to advance these issues of addressing racism as it manifests in interpersonal interactions and systemic functions as it relates to policies and practices. And so we're really thrilled with the group that stepped forward, and we want to thank everybody who submitted an application to be a part of the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel with its expanded mandate. And of course, with that mandate, there's going to be a lot to do, but I think I can speak with Mr. Ainsworth Morgan and say that we're quite confident that we've been able to bring forward the right folks to help get that work done over the course of our 3-year mandate. I'll turn it over to Mr. Ainsworth Morgan if he wants to add anything else.
Thank you, Anthony. And I would, echo a lot of what Anthony said, and I do believe being a real sort of world leader in this work is important. And I will tell you, we've had many debates and conversations of making sure we did our best to have a real diverse group of members. And a lot of what was shared in this process is to ensure that we were authentically engaging with community and making sure that it's not just this tokenism or that allows them to be part of the conversation, part of the solution. So, along with Anthony, we're really looking forward to this work ahead. With the understanding this is part of the solution, not the solution, and it's a collective responsibility that we have. So we're really looking forward to be able to share and grow and learn together and have some of those uncomfortable and difficult conversations, but continue to stay engaged and move towards collective solutions. So again, thank you for this, and if there's any questions, we'll be more than happy to speak to them.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Any questions for co-chairs? Ms. Kostakis?
Marie Molliner has a question.
Okay, Ms. Kostakis, then Ms. Molliner.
Good morning, Morgans. Just a question on people around the table, and I know you're engaging with the community in that. Are there also other opportunities where you have as a model that a lot of the knowledge and the learning and the practices could be spread a little wider? Is there any way someone can contact you, whether it's agencies or individuals within communities that are interested? I know we have a lot of our youth that are really working diligently, and councils that have been established that can maybe join in a meeting and observe the work that you're doing as well, which I think is a really great opportunity for consistent messaging, but also just the advocacy piece of it and the educational piece regarding anti-Black racism, so that everyone is getting to the same page, or the same practices and the same values and just the same purpose. So are there opportunities for groups like that to be able to join into a meeting or access the expertise that's around your table, and for yourselves also to access any other resources or expertise or information from other tables that are working for the same purpose?
So and I can speak to that, and Anthony, jump in when you feel the need. This has been, we've taken some time to sort of get to the point where we're at right now, and we wanted to really be comprehensive in our search and with the process. Our first meeting will be occurring in a few weeks. At that time, we'll be presenting sort of our mandate and getting to build some sort of cohesion with the team. There will be some subcommittees that will be created out of this that will look at doing some of the things that you just mentioned, along with, but we want to also be really clear that we're hearing from community and what is their how do they see their role in ARAP and what we can do to support that. But absolutely, there will be opportunities for to engage with community and with the youth as we move forward. Anthony, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Kostakis. Ms. Mulliner?
Thank you very much. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Good, thank you. So my question is about the work plan going forward and how that will be developed and shared. But before I hear a little bit about what may be on track with respect to the work plan, I just want to shout out to both Mr. Morgans, but to Anthony Morgan in particular for having stayed the course with us. You have been at the table with this board for a very long time, and I know it has been relentless effort on your part and the support of other community members. So I'm so impressed with the quality of the selection process. I don't know many of these members, which I think is so exciting. And I think that, as Ainsworth Morgan said, this really is an opportunity for the TPS to shine globally. So we should be very, very proud. And there's so much going on that we are at a point in history where I think these are the kinds of relationships that will rebuild a trust that has taken decades of back and forth. And now I think we can actually see some light at the end of the tunnel. So thank you very much. I'll turn it over to whichever one of you might like to talk about the work plan and how it will be shared. Thank you.
Well, first, I would just really like to say thank you for that acknowledgement. One thing I really want to do say is that while I recognize that there have been very serious shortcomings as it relates to how communities have wanted to see policing roll out in our city, there has been a kind of responsiveness that has made me say that, you know what, it's still worth coming to the table and still fighting, still having these conversations, still trying to find ways to bring the voices of community into these spaces so that we can see the kinds of changes that the diverse range of our communities want to see. So that's why, of course, I stick to it, and I'm happy to join Mr. Ainsworth Morgan in this new part of the journey with this range of really dynamic, brilliant, grounded, community engaged leaders who we're putting forward to recommend for membership on the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel. With respect to the work plan, the grounding place, or the starting place, of course, will be looking at the recommendations that have led to the expanded mandate of the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel. And what we anticipate is undertaking a kind of workshopping with our new membership, where we will look at what do we prioritize over the course of our 3 years in developing a year-by-year course of activities, where we will be able to say that on the basis of what's happening within our communities, what we're hearing, these are the things that we are going to prioritize for this year, and develop a quarterly process for making sure that we are staying on track to advance the different calls for change that have come out of the expanded mandate that we'll have. And so it'll start with those recommendations, but also be mindful of, for instance, being mindful and being responsive to some of the ways that community will continue to ask for advances in policing. And so we plan on having a model that is based on a year-by-year annual plan, but then also creating space through regular check-ins with community to make sure that we are hearing from the voice of the range of folks who have an interest in seeing more anti-racism in our police systems. I can turn over to Mr. Ainsworth Morgan, who may want to say more to that in detail.
Thank you, Anthony. Not much more to add. I would just want to say, it's great to hear this level of enthusiasm for ARAP, and I'm hoping that I'm confident that we'll be able to keep the same level of support and enthusiasm when recommendations come from ARAP that may not necessarily, they might be somewhat contentious, that we continue to have this same level of commitment and enthusiasm to get to some collective solutions. So just really looking forward to the work and grateful for the opportunity.
Board members, any other questions? Seeing none. Again, I just want to thank both of you for being leaders in this space, and I can't think of any more important work that this board has to do. So thanks to both of you. We'll now move forward to approving this report. I would ask Mr. Morgan to move adoption. Mr. Morgan, will you move adoption of the report?
Yes, I'd like to move the adoption of the recommendations from the RAP committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Could I have a seconder? Ms. Kostakis, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thanks again to both of you. Thanks so much. We'll now move on to item number 4. Item number 4 is the member well-being strategy and framework. We have 2 deputants. The first deputant is Mr. Derek Moran. Doobie, when you're ready, if you could put on Derek, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Derek, you should receive a prompt from the system now. So unmute.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, I'm just going to start my timer here. And remember, Chair Hart, my mom called me Derek. So all I heard after Chris Langenfeld's comments were basically that Chief Raymer thinks it's okay to defraud the public with maritime law because that's what acts and statutes are, which is the law of the seas, boat law on dry land effectively, because a portion of this public who have no idea about what the law actually is, by the way, really want them to enforce their precious maritime law on dry land. And we here at the Toronto Police don't know who has COVID. So we're just going to go ahead and speculate without any evidence that everyone has COVID. The Toronto Police have deemed everyone to be sick until proven healthy, as Mocha from the Rebel News would say. But I've got good news for Chief Raymer and the Toronto Police, who are worried about their well-being in regards to the new variants of concern. Not only does he say that there's no such thing as these variants, but Scott Duncan says that COVID-19 is extinct. Isn't that great news? For those who still blindly believe whatever Dr. Davila tells them, if you're a TPS member who is worried about their well-being, you could possibly be wondering if you're currently what's known as asymptomatic. The problem is, not many people actually know what that term means. And the title of my written presentation is, "This is notice to the Toronto Police that asymptomatic transmission has never been the driver of outbreaks." So if you go on the province's science table COVID-19 page, they have a glossary which actually defines asymptomatic. An individual who is infected with a pathogen but does not have symptoms. So this is from the BMJ, the British Medical Journal. Searching for people who are asymptomatic yet infectious is like searching for needles that appear and reappear transiently in haystacks. The absence of strong evidence that asymptomatic people are a driver of transmission is another good reason for pausing the rollout of mass testing in schools, universities, and communities. A citywide prevalence study of almost 10 million people in Wuhan found no evidence of asymptomatic transmission. Now, this is Dr. Williams. I provide the YouTube link on the possibility of asymptomatic spread. We have been trying to get advice and direction from the WHO. So far from the Public Health Agency of Canada, their position is that if someone does not have symptoms, they usually are not shedding. That is our working case definition at this time. Again, this is, I've repeated this a few times before, Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove, Technical Lead COVID-19 from the World Health Organization Health Emergency Program, who says, I provide the YouTube link and the meme here that I made of her, but from the data we have, it still seems to be rare that an asymptomatic person actually transmits onward to a secondary individual. And if anyone bothers to watch that clip, she actually adds earlier that it's very rare. Now here's Dr. Anthony Fauci on the subject. I provide the YouTube link. He says that, but the one thing historically people need to realize that even if there is some asymptomatic transmission, in all the history of respiratory-borne viruses of any type, asymptomatic transmission has never been the driver of outbreaks. The driver of outbreaks is always a symptomatic person. Even if there's a rare asymptomatic person that might transmit, an epidemic is not driven by asymptomatic carriers. I'm going to repeat part of that again. The driver of outbreaks is always a symptomatic person. Do you think anyone who's feeling the symptoms of COVID feels well enough to go down every Saturday to Young Dundas Square to protest or get assaulted for holding a sign at Queen's Park? Are you kidding me? If they're symptomatic with COVID, they feel so sick, kind of like with when you have the flu, they're not going to be able to lift their head off their pillow in the morning. They're going to stay home in bed. So no one's down there at Young Dundas Square and Queen's Park spreading stuff, which gives legitimacy to what the Toronto police are doing to those peaceful protesters. And let's not forget in R versus KTS, Superior Court of Justice 2020, the court pointed out that Crown Counsel themselves argued the similarity between the annual flu and COVID-19. And that's my time.
Thank you, Derek. Any questions of Derek? Seeing none. Thank you very much for taking the time, Derek. Appreciate it. Zuba, can you put on the next deputant, Mr. John Reed, who is the president of the Toronto Police Association?
Yes, Mr. Reed, you should receive a prompt from the system now.
Yes, good morning. Am I on?
Yes, you are. Go ahead when you're ready.
Very good, sir. Thank you. So good morning, everybody. My name is John Reed. I'm the president of the Toronto Police Association. I've been a police officer now for 32 years. 9 of those years I spent at the Toronto Police Association on the board of directors. I'd like to thank Chair Hart, the members of the Toronto Police Services Board, Chief Raymer, members of command for the opportunity to speak today about the TPS well-being strategy. My comments are being made on behalf of the Toronto Police Association Board of Directors, the 8,000 members who work as police officers, special constables, and civilians with the Toronto Police Service. Our members' well-being will always be a top priority for the TPA. We know firsthand that members who are healthy, both physically and emotionally, are better able to meet their demands of their job. We also know the many risk factors and have seen firsthand the effects on well-being of our members due to some of the jobs they perform. The conditions presented by the COVID-19 pandemic have also amplified job-related hazards and risks to our members' well-being. The TPA has observed an increase in the frequency and types of support mechanisms our members are seeking out to get help on the road to recovery. These supports include healthcare after contracting COVID-19, mental health support, assistance with the help from post-critical incidents, access to physical fitness solutions, additional pressures and stresses of that on our members and families having to cope with the result of defund the police movement and the anti-police narratives that are being reported widely in the media. These are just to name a few. The well-being strategy presented by the board today represents a very significant multi-year commitment to implement and put into action. I want to take the opportunity to emphasize that as a stakeholder in this strategy, the TPA sees the strategy to be a tremendous value and benefit to our members. However, the critical feature of success and sustainability of these action plans will be what the strategy identifies as a personalization of members' wellness needs. The TPA has a track record of success with helping our members who benefit from having their needs met with services and supports that truly do get to the root of their illness, injury, and state of unwellness. By not treating the member just as another injured on duty, another case file, and having that personalized touch in our experience significantly increases the member's response and commitment to getting the help they need. I want to leave the board command with a final comment about the well-being strategy from the Chief's report today. We all know there are many support programs, services, service providers, technologies, community partners, peer groups out there that are all geared towards supporting member wellness and well-being. This strategy appears to present an opportunity and a mechanism to ensure a much better coordination and integration of internal, external wellness services and providers that exist within the TPS, the external healthcare wellness sectors, as well as partners in the community. I believe that the ongoing coordination of member well-being supports under one unified plan will be the most important aspect of the success of this strategy. A clear, unified plan will ensure that members have unencumbered place to seek out support, however their well-being needs manifest, and evolve over the course of their career with the Toronto Police Service. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reid. Questions of the Deputy? Councillor Ford?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Reid, for deputing in front of the board on such an important item. I just want to ask you if you think the association and your membership has been adequately consulted in the creation of this well-being strategy.
So I think in my function now, I've only just come up as the president of the association. I think this will be an ongoing need as far as the consultation process. This is a larger issue, and I think really does need to be addressed. And we need to make sure that everyone communicates and everyone has a clear path as to what their opportunities and functions are within this process. My ultimate goal is to make sure that we create the best possible system for our men and women to get back to work as soon as they can and provide all the support we can. And having it kind of put together as far as a one-stop shopping, I think is the best route, so people don't have to hunt around.
Okay, and then just, Mr. Chair, just one more question, kind of going off Mr. Reid's comments on that. Do you believe that, you know, the door or the association, do you feel like the association has an open door into our board office and into the service for future consultation?
Yes, we do.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Board members, any other questions of the Deputy? Councillor Nunziata, then Ms. Kostakis.
Yeah, just to Mr. Reid. So you support the report that the chief has brought forward today and on the recommendation, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And are there any recommendations or changes that you would like to see in the report that we can incorporate, other than consulting with the members? Do you feel?
I think the consulting with the members is an important piece, but also actually having the association and some of the external parties actually embedded in the process as far as the design. So it's actually built from the ground up, and we're not kind of bringing groups in halfway through.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ms. Kostakis, then Mayor Tory.
Yeah, I think it's both for the debutant and probably the service. I got my hand went up really quickly there. And I think it's just two tiers. So one, if it could be expanded or the challenges maybe sort of systemically and individually, is this strategy going to be working simultaneously to address or to, I guess, reach the desired outcome of what this strategy's purpose is? And also, and secondly, what would be the biggest sort of challenge, and maybe there's more challenges from, I guess, both perspectives, from the debutants and the services perspective, of what would be the largest challenge in achieving the desired outcomes with this strategy?
So from the TPA's point of view, I think the biggest piece, which always seems to be an issue for larger organizations, is the communication piece, and making sure that everyone is communicating clearly and consistently, and making sure that information is getting passed back and forth.
Any other questions, Ms. Kostakis?
just, I guess, when the service is able to respond to the same questions.
Yeah, okay. We'll get there soon. Mayor Tory?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Reid, thanks very much for coming this morning. I should just say that in your short time as president, I'm certainly hearing from you on behalf of your members and in a very constructive way, I should say, and I appreciate that as evidenced by this morning. I wondered if you could just give us, we've got an item coming up later on that is the, what is it called here? The, if I could just find it, but it's the health and safety, I think, update that talks about one of the biggest categories of lost time and more important than lost time, just the well-being of your members is in fact emotional and psychological issues. And I just wondered if you could give us a short comment on behalf of the men and women that you represent as to whether those are things more, say, born out of specific incidents people get involved in, or the general stress of the job, or just other stresses in people's lives. Because I mean, I know you hear from people, and I think it's in the context of this well-being plan, it's important to understand that, and I'd love to hear from the chief about this too, but I just, wondered if you had any comments about that, just in terms of what you hear about from your members about their experiences in this regard, because it's been rising up as one of the top 3 or 4 causes of people being off work. And obviously I'm less concerned about the being off work than I am about just the well-being of these people, these human beings.
Yes, sir. So I think one of the, I don't actually have the statistics to kind of break it down for those 3 areas, but I think critical incidents, unfortunately, are part and parcel of this job. They happen quite frequently, and they're very, very impactful on our members. We've tried to make a lot of advances now to try and support our membership. We need to do better. We need to do more for that. There's also, I think, a general underlying stress in policing. When I started many years ago, policing was quite different. Policing's changed considerably, but also is the support for police. I still believe, honestly, that there's a lot of support out there for the police, but I don't think people are willing to show it as they were 30 years ago, which is unfortunate. Because our men and women come to work every day. They've been coming to work through the pandemic, doing their duty, doing the radio calls, and doing what they're paid to do. And they've done a great job through this pandemic. And I think that does in itself produce a degree of stress. And with your third item, I think just family stress, I think that's for all of us. COVID has been a very difficult time for everybody. And I think everyone's kind of having to contend with it as best they can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, any other questions of Mr. Reid? Before we move to questions of the service, I just want to say, John, thanks very much for coming today to Depute. And I want to thank you for your advocacy and leadership on the health and safety. As a co-chair of the Central Joint Health and Safety Committee, I've seen you in action since I've been board chair, and you're a terrific advocate for your members, and I really appreciate your input. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you, John. We'll now take this into questioning of the service. Board members, any questions of the service? Ms. Kostakis first.
Just, I guess, to recap and try to be a little bit more succinct on how is the strategy, if you could maybe expand on it, how the strategy is simultaneously working systemically and also with the focus of the individual's well-being. So any systemic issues that are occurring or barriers to help you reach the outcome desired goals of what this strategy's purpose is, 1, and 2, what would be your biggest challenge in moving forward with having this model or strategy be, the outcome of the desired outcomes being accomplished.
Ivy, did you want to go ahead with that? If not, I can. Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, good morning. So I think in response to kind of the combination of the individual and the systemic goals, I think what we've been very intentional to try and figure out ways to, have elements of this program be able to cater to a member experience and the individual needs of members, making sure that there's diverse offerings, that we're taking a lens of making sure that, you know, we're not trying to find solutions in a homogenous type of approach, that we are getting input from multiple stakeholders, like John Reed just mentioned about the need to really examine who externally from the service, as well as partnering within the service that we can leverage. But there's also an element embedded into this strategy and framework that we hope will be a little bit more evergreen, where we can start to move the needle on systemic issues. Things like access, things like stigma, things like identifying barriers to what makes people not want to engage in their own self-care, whether that's related to physical, mental, you know, psychological, within their own life, you know, as you know, John mentioned around, you know, life and family issues. There's a lot of things that we identify as barriers, and so and really trying to foster through whether that's education, awareness, accessibility, those more systemic barriers that over time and that we'll be able to see a shift there. And I think we already are starting to be honest. I think the service has already started to move the needle a lot, but I do think that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done.
And is it the same sort of focus, with like sexism, racism, etc., those issues that also occur, harassment, that are being looked at as well at the same time when you're looking at the health and well-being, because a lot of those issues that exist affect the health and well-being of the officers as well?
Yeah, so I think that what we have identified in this is that we can't look at anything in a silo, and that we can't, but with that said, we do need, there are boundaries around what we can offer and what we can't offer on an individual situation, right? We need to be mindful of setting realistic expectations, that we are not, you know, trying to replicate the healthcare system, we're not trying to replicate the legal system, the financial system, et cetera, but we are, you know, looking at what we can do within our own purview, but also partnering with other agencies and our agencies, services, programs that may be able to touch on that. What we have also done is, you know, really engaged a partnership with our Equity, Inclusion, and Human Rights group, who are able to, you know, provide insights and ideas, and it's a constant collaboration there. We also have engaged in conversations, somewhat preliminary at this point, but with an intention for ongoing discussion with the Wellesley Institute, so that we can be thinking more broadly about how some of these well-being services can be connected to other issues. In answer to what are some of the barriers, or not barriers, but what is maybe some of the biggest issues in seeing our goals come to life, I think it's multifold. I think this is intended on being a strategy and framework that is multi-year. So, you know, we are not expecting to deliver everything right away, but we will be building blocks along the way to kind of, you know, incrementally be able to implement things with the, you know, so that we don't miss opportunities for stakeholder engagement and input from members along the way. And we also have, you know, competing priorities that we need to evaluate within the service, whether that's staffing, whether it's, you know, issues of the day that, you know, we need to be able to determine where this fits in the big picture. And I think that might be, you know, a matter of, you know, our most ambitious goal is to be able to do everything right away, but sometimes we need to step back and say what is realistic this year, and what then builds towards what we want to deliver on year 2, year 3, and then thereafter. Deputy Coxon, does that sound, do you have anything to add there?
Thank you. No, that was fantastic. I will say one thing, because I know it came up as a question at the December board meeting, and that is specifically that the funding for this strategy really, it's listed in the report, the funding for this year to really look at the report and map out the implementation. We have the budget for that this year. Everything else above and beyond that is going to have to be reconsidered for following budgets. And that's going to be a challenge, because these kinds of services, system navigators, the kind of specialized resourcing we need, it's a challenge. And I think, as John Reed mentioned, from the TPA perspective, there may be opportunities to look at doing this holistically with other first responders, both within the City of Toronto and provincially. So we really have to look at leveraging those opportunities because it's a huge need and also a significant cost to do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. Board members, any other questions? I've just got one question, either for Ivy or for the deputy, whoever wants to take it. Can you tell me a little bit about the consultation that went into this?
Yep. So we had, well, I would say we had extensive consultation in as much as we were able to do in the context of COVID this past year. But with that said, we had over 1,500 members who participated in the survey that has helped to inform this. We did a number of interviews to the tune of, you know, probably close to 100 different interviews with various people, groups of people, internally and externally. We referenced a lot of the most recent reports and literature from that has been written about, you know, well-being and policing in general and public safety personnel. We've also had done quite extensive interviews with other services to find out what they're doing. The TPA has been at the, you know, a stakeholder in discussions, and then also members of the SUE, and we also did solicit some feedback from the Mental Health and Addictions Advisory Panel. Some of our ideas were presented there with for some feedback as well, and there were family members who also offered to provide, family members of our members who offered to provide some feedback on their experiences as well.
Thank you. That's great. One more time, board members, any questions? Just before we wrap this up, I'll ask the chief if he has anything he'd like to add. Chief, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, just simply that wellness is a real priority for us, and we're going to keep making the changes that are necessary so we have the proper suite of services for our members.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Well, now, anyone wish to speak to this item? No? Okay, great. Oh, wait a minute.
Recommendation. I'll move the
Councilor
recommendation.
Yeah, you're moving. Nunziata is moving the report. Could I have a seconder? Councillor Ford, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. That was great work. Great report. Thank you. We'll now move forward to item number 8, which is special constable appointment authorities, and there are 3 sub-reports, 8.1, 8.2, 8.3. I know we have a motion that's going to be placed, which I'll request when we get to speakers. Before we get there, though, we have a deputation from Derek. So whenever Derek is ready.
Hi, Derek. You need to unmute.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, I'm just going to start my timer here. Just want to say to Chris Langenfeld, the reason the board hasn't had an item on its agenda the past 2 months regarding the stay-at-home orders is because the Rebel News is suing the Toronto Police for assaulting the reporters, so my guess is you've all been advised not to say anything on the record lest it be used against you when the matter goes to court. So in this report it says, during POU deployments at demonstrations, crowds will sometimes leave their protest site to march throughout the city, granting POU HOT members with certain HTA authorities. It will allow them to lawfully assist with road closures to ensure the safety of the participants during their marches. Below this is a headline which reads, training. My recommendation is these special constables be trained, especially now in light of Chief Raymer's response to Chris Langenfeld's presentation, in the knowledge of late law professor Peter Hogg's clarification of Section 32.1 of the Constitution Act 1982, which again has yet to come into force, subject to Section 59 of it, which basically explains that acts and statutes only apply to government actors, government actions, and those performing a public function of government. More specifically, it's said in Slate Communications versus Davidson, 1989, Supreme Court of Canada. Now, when I say adjudicator, just replace that with Premier Ford. The fact that the charter applies to the order made by the adjudicator, Premier Ford, in the case at bar is not, in my opinion, open to question. Accordingly, an adjudicator, Premier Ford, exercising delegated powers does not have the power to make an order that would result in an infringement of the charter, and he exceeds his jurisdiction if he does so. This idea was very well expressed by Professor Hogg when he wrote in his titled text, Constitutional Law of Canada. It follows that any body exercising statutory authority, for example, the governor and council or lieutenant governor and council, ministers, officials, municipalities, school boards, universities, administrative tribunals, and police officers is also bound by the Charter. Thus, the limitations on statutory authority which are imposed by the Charter will flow down the chain of statutory authority and apply to regulations, bylaws, orders, in this case, decisions, and all other action, whether legislative, administrative, or judicial, which depends for its validity on statutory authority. I just want to point out the title of my written presentation is, This is Notice to the Toronto Police Services that Premier Ford has no authority to obstruct a right. Now, this is from Preet versus Ontario Attorney General, 1993, where the Court of Appeal said, the reasons of Justice Lamer standing alone are strongly persuasive that a statutory enactment cannot stand in the way of a constitutional entitlement. You know, like, you guys just can't take away our rights and freedoms by passing a statute. If you think you can, then just please resign already. This is from the reference regarding provincial fisheries 1896 from the Supreme Court of Canada. And in the Lord versus Queen, the Queen versus the Lord, Justice Peters, delivering the judgment of the Supreme Court of Prince Edward Island, said, with respect to these public rights regarding navigation and fishery, the King is, in fact, nothing more than a trustee of the public and has no authority to obstruct or grant to others any right to obstruct or abridge the public in the free enjoyment of them. I know this case specifically deals with fishing and navigation rights, but look at what's being said there. If even the King, or in this case the Queen, doesn't have the authority to obstruct the free enjoyment of these rights, then how does anyone think Premier Ford has even more authority than the Queen to obstruct our rights and freedoms with a magic stay-at-home order? This is Gauthier versus the King, 1918, Supreme Court of Canada. While responsibility in cases falling within it must be determined according to the law of the province in which the cause of action arises, but the general law relating to the subject matter applicable to the Crown in right of the Dominion which governs. And that law in the province of Ontario is the English common law. That's the law, everybody. English common law. If you don't know that by now, then please quit so we can get somebody who can actually do the job properly.
Thank you, Derek. Any questions of the Deputant?
You're welcome, Chair Hart.
Seeing none, we'll now take this item into the board's hands. Any questions of the report? Any questions of staff? Seeing none, look for speakers now. Mr. Morgan, I understand you have a motion. If staff could put the motion up.
Yes, sir. Just 1 second. Here we are.
Okay. Can everyone see the motion all right? Okay, Mr. Morgan, would you like to speak briefly to the motion? What's being moved?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hart. Yes, I think given what we heard this morning with conversation around the acceptance of the ARAP committee, I think, you know, this motion is important in the sense that we want to be able to have the group like ARAP have the opportunity to engage in some of the recommendations that are being asked for here. So I really think it's an important thing to allow us to have that opportunity to speak to this, and I support the motion in going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. So everyone had a chance to read where this is being sent? Requesting the TCHC and the University of Toronto to meet with representatives of Black Action Defense Committee, discuss and provide further details during the areas raised in this deputation report, and specifically the training, monitoring, and evaluation of the special constables employed by these organizations, back to the execution authority in the Ontario Cannabis Control Act, by CAGC with respect to any enhancements that can be made in these areas, and direct the chief to require the statistics regarding the application of authorities under the Ontario Cannabis Act by special constables employed by these organizations be reported as part of the annual reports filed by these organizations with the board, which are considered annually in a public meeting of the board. So just for clarity, this item came up through a request for a deputation that came in late. So we couldn't place it before the board, but we're taking this action because we feel that the item that was brought before us through a written correspondence had great value in it, and we felt it should be followed up. So the referral will be to those bodies to take action, report back, and to involve the chief as well. So are there any questions of the motion? Can't see everybody right now. I can only see what's on the screen. So if any questions?
Sure. Yeah, I just had a comment, if I could, when it's time. It's John.
Go ahead, Mayor Tory. I can't see anyone else.
Okay. I was just going to say that having read the deputation, I think, this is such an appropriate thing to do, and I strongly support this motion because, it's sometimes you're inclined to sort of rubber stamp a request and say, well, that seems reasonable, that those constables should do that, be able to do that. But then you sort of have to ask yourself, and the deputation, the written deputation really did, and sort of said, well, does this apply to people passing a joint back and forth, to each other, because that might constitute distributing cannabis, products. And clearly that's not what is sought out here. But I think sometimes before you present the solution, you better understand what the problem is, when you're giving more powers to people who are in this special constable category. So to me, this inquiry, both the first and second parts of this motion, is entirely appropriate so that we can then properly answer whether this is power or authority that should be given to them. And I just think the deputation was well reasoned, and the motion is too, and I'll support it.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Anyone else wish to speak on this? Speak up if you do. I can only see the present. I can only see the motion. I can't see all of you. Hearing none, I will ask someone, perhaps Mr. Morgan, to move.
Mr. Chair, sorry, I just noticed the Vice Chair, Councillor Nunziata, had her hand up.
Okay. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
We can't hear you yet, Councillor. Sorry, you'll have to try again.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. I just have one question, if you don't mind, and I'm sorry, I should have asked that earlier. So the motion that is put forward, that's part of item number 8, which is that we're approving the appointments. So does that mean that these appointments that we have before us are deferred, or we're going to approve the appointments and then add the motion, an additional motion?
Yes, I'll take
for future appointments. So I just wanted to clarify that. I'm sorry for asking it so late in the process.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. We are forward with the appointments. This motion actually relates specifically, it's item 8, but it relates specifically to 8.2. which is the addition of Ontario Cannabis Control Act authorities. So it's a question about the authorities of the individuals, not the appointment of the individuals. So we're moving forward with the appointments. We're just asking a question relative to authority. Any other questions? Are we okay to move forward?
Chair, if I just might make a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Chief.
Actually, what I will say is that the whole special constable program really is part of that, the modernization process, where we're having, rather than fully armed and trained police officers, we're having lower paid trained people to perform these functions. And I agree with the written submission that with the addition of these authorities, they will require intensive training, monitoring, and evaluation. And so we will have the current MOU amended so that what you've directed me to do will be accomplished, and we will have those statistics made available for public meetings.
Thank you, Chief. Can I now have a motion to approve item 8 as amended by the motion put forward by Morgan? Councilor Nunziata, I can't see everyone on the screen, so if somebody could just speak up.
I'll second, Lisa.
Thank you very much. All in favor? Any opposed? That item carries. Now move forward to item number 9 on the agenda, which is the quarterly report, Occupational Health and Safety Update for October the 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2020. And we have a deputant, Derek. Whenever he's ready, please put him on. Thank you.
Derek, please unmute.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, I'm just going to start my timer here. I just want to say by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied in doing so as fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen and long live Her Majesty the Queen. And let the record show as individual mentioned in Premier Ford's stay-at-home order is defined as a natural person in the Legislation Act of Ontario. If I have ever led the Toronto Police Services and or this board to believe in any way that I am a natural person, then that would be a mistake. And I ask all of you to please forgive me. You know, I find it amazing. Late last night, the brand new chief of defense we had voluntarily stepped down while he's being investigated by the military police. But it would never even occur to anyone at the Toronto Police to investigate Dr. Davila to see if her health advice is actually based on science, evidence, peer-reviewed studies, scientific literature, or if she's lying and her advice is just based on arbitrary decisions. So in this report it says, I just want to read the title of my written presentation. This is notice to the Toronto Police that lockdown stay-at-home orders aren't based on high cases, but the unreliable PCR test that produces false positives from being run at too high of an amplification cycle threshold value. So in this report, it says, in partnership with the Emergency Management and Public Order Unit, Toronto Paramedic Services, and Toronto Fire Services, dedicated test sites were established to increase availability of testing. So if you go on the Province of Ontario's website, they have a flu page. It says some of the symptoms of COVID-19 are similar to the flu. Hey, that's exactly what the Crown Counsel said in that earlier court case I read. And it may be hard to tell the difference between them based on symptoms alone. You may need a COVID-19 test to help confirm a COVID-19 diagnosis. As Dr. Davila has said that her health advice is based on the science, the evidence, the scientific literature, peer-reviewed studies, and from other jurisdictions. This is from the same Portuguese Court of Appeal case I spoke about a few months ago, which found that the PCR test used to detect tests for COVID is incapable of determining beyond a reasonable doubt that a positive result corresponds to being infected with COVID. And I provide all this in my written presentation. Now, the court said, in view of the current scientific evidence, the test is in itself incapable of determining beyond reasonable doubt that such positivity corresponds, in fact, to the infection of a person by the SARS-CoV-2 virus, by several reasons of which we highlight two. One, for this reliably depend on the number of cycles that make up the test. For this reliability depends on the amount of viral load present. Indeed, the PCR tests, molecular biology tests that detect the RNA of the virus, commonly used in Portugal to test and enumerate the number of infected, are performed by amplifying samples through repetitive cycles. The number of cycles of such amplification results in the greater or lesser reliability of such tests. The problem is that this reliability is shown in terms of scientific evidence, and in this field, the judge will have to rely on the knowledge of experts in the field, more than debatable. This is the result, among others, of the very recent and comprehensive correlation study by Rita Jafar and a whole bunch of other scientists, published at the end of September this year by Oxford Academic, carried out by a group that brings together some of the greatest European and world experts in the field. This study concluded at a cycle threshold of 25. About 70% of the samples remain positive in the cell culture. Example, they were infected. In a cycle threshold CT of 30, 20% of the samples remain positive. In a CT of 35, 3% of the samples remain positive. And in a CT above 35, no sample remain positive infectious in cell culture. This means that if a person has a positive PCR test at a cycle threshold of 35 or higher, and keep in mind, in Ontario, we run this PCR test at a cycle threshold of about 38 to 42, I believe. As in most laboratories in the USA and Europe, the chances of a person being infected are less than 3%. The probability that the person will receive a false positive is 97% or higher. So I would just point that out to Chief Raymer to show some compassion to your fellow man and woman down at those protests tomorrow, because those high cases are 97% false positives.
Thank you, Derek. Board members, any questions of Derek? Seeing none. Enjoy your day.
You did your heart.
Any on item number 9? Board members, any questions? Anyone wish to speak to it? Seeing none, can I have a motion to receive item number 9? Councillor Ford, seconded by Mayor Tory. All in favor? Any opposed? Item number 9 carries. Before we move on to item number 11, I understand, Mayor Tory, you would like to reopen item number 13. Is that correct?
With the consent of the board, I realized as you were going through that I had written something down that I think is quite important, and so I'd just like to ask a question on that. So yes, please.
Could I have a seconder to reopen number 13? That would be Councillor Ford. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Item number 13 is reopened. So our second last item is item number 11, which is the annual report 2020 statistical report, Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. We have a deputant, Mr. Langenfeld, whenever he's ready.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead when you're ready, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I just got to find the page where I have my notes here. Yeah, this is on the AMFIPA, Municipal Freedom of Information and Privacy Protection Act, the statistical report. And I just noticed in the discussion section on page 2 of the Chief's report, it has table 1, which is the APS compliance rate by percentage in terms of them meeting the compliance in responding in time to requests from the public for freedom of information. In order to be able to properly interpret that information, we should also know the monthly numbers of requests and the monthly backlogs that are appearing there. As we look at these numbers, it raises the question. I note, for example, here in September of 2019, it says compliance was 63%. In April and May of 2020, the compliance was down to 45 and 33%. And so it raises the question, are the drops in compliance in September 2019 or in April and May 2020 the result of an unusual surge in the number of requests submitted, or a reduction of productivity due to COVID restrictions, or both? And so we need that extra data, specifically the number of requests each month and the number of backlogs at month end, to be added to these reports so that we can in fact properly interpret that. So hopefully that'll appear in the future reports. Also, I just wanted to mention on Member Ainsworth Morgan's motion there on item 8.2, the Special Constable's Cannabis Control Act enforcement. I'd just like to suggest that it should also include Special Constable reporting that the chief that's in that motion that directs him to report to the board, that the report should also include the statistical racial data that is currently being accumulated in other TPS reports, and so it should be included in any other reporting that the chief is providing in relation to Special Constable actions and enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Langenfeld. Any questions for the deputy? Seeing none, thank you. Chief, can either you or one of your service members respond to Mr. Langenfeld's question and comments around the statistics?
Yes, I'll turn it over to Tony V.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. Certainly, we're providing the information now in terms of compliance on a monthly basis, as you've seen, and thankfully that compliance rate is actually increasing over where we were. We have no issue at all with providing information on a monthly basis. I think Mr. Langenfeld has suggested that we provide the number of requests that we get each month, as well as where we're at, I guess, at month end in terms of backlog. Again, no issue with that. Keeping in mind that some of the requests that, let's say, we get on September 29th probably won't be dealt with until the following month. But certainly no issue with providing that additional information.
Thank you, Mr.
Venetiano.
Any board members? Thank you, Mr. Langenfeld, for your deputation. You're still on the line. Thank you very much. Board members, any questions on the report itself, or anyone wish to speak to it? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve item number 11? Motion to approve, Vice Chair Nunziata, seconded by Ms. Kostakis. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. We'll now move forward to our last item, which is the annual report 2020 uniform promotions. Mayor Tory, I believe you had a question.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. As we were going through the rundown, sometimes when I see the numbers, I don't attach them to the item. I had taken a look at this, and in particular looked at Appendix C, and I think these are the kinds of questions that we have to ask, not simply because I think we need to find explanations for these things, whether they involve process explanations or other things, especially in light of some of the other discussions we've had earlier today about anti-Black racism, just about systemic racism. And so I may have done this analysis incorrectly, but I don't think so. I took the biggest groups that were represented in the Appendix C, page 4 of the promotions. And the biggest groups, I think, of the total who applied were 58 people who were identified themselves as Black, 70 who identified themselves as South Asian, and 353 who identified themselves as white. And if you assume that you go through a process then that has people write an exam and get interviewed and then actually get or don't get promoted, and that's kind of what's the word I'm looking for, an evolutionary process. You go from one step to the next. What you see, and again, I may be oversimplifying this, but I think it's just numbers that cause me to simply want to hear a little bit about what we're doing, but maybe ask the chief and the service to do a little bit more to look into this and to decide if there's something wrong, for example, with the way we do the interviews or the exams, or something wrong with how we do evaluation, or whatever the answer may be. But I think there has to be an answer as to why you would have a situation where in the group of Black applicants, 58 of them, 13.7% got interviewed and 1.7% got hired, or got promoted rather. In the case of the South Asian, of which there were 70, so not that much bigger a number, but 70, 24% got interviewed and 8.5% got promoted. And then when you go down to the white, which was by far the biggest group, 38% got interviewed and 21% got promoted. And so I think while the groups are much different in size, and that could be part of the analysis that somebody might do and see why that is too, but I think that maybe, in part comes from a smaller pool of people who would apply, be interviewed, write the exam, and so on. I just think those numbers are different enough, taken on a relative basis, that we should be looking at that. And one of the things I've learned in going through a lot of these kinds of issues is that there may be ways in which we have structured the process of examination and of interview and so on that disadvantages some groups, including in this case Black applicants for promotion. And I just think it's important, if we're going to have the service become more representative over time and make sure everybody has a fair chance, that we look at that. And there may be lots of learnings that come out of it, quite frankly, in the context of all groups. But I just think it's, when it comes to promotion, this is a very important thing to take a look at. And so I would just ask that happen, and that maybe the chief could also tell us some of the things that are already being done in order to make sure that all people from the diversity of what is the Toronto Police Service today, and it's much more diverse than it once was, because these are people by definition that already belong to the service. What steps have been taken to examine this process of promotion, which is the next thing? Once you can recruit people that are more representative of the population they serve, then the next part is going to be to make sure people have equitable and equal opportunity to rise up through the ranks and be in leadership positions. So those were my comments, and I apologize that I just didn't, as you were passing over the numbers, I didn't pick that one up, that I wanted to hold it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, can you comment, please?
Yes, actually, I'll have Deputy Coxon comment. Please, Shauna, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can tell you that we had the same reaction to looking at these diversity statistics as you do. And it's not just the promotional process in and of itself. It's actually a broader issue than that, I would suggest, meaning that it's an issue, as you said, of not just hiring, but where people are deployed, what kind of opportunities they have, and that kind of a systemic approach right across the service is certainly being looked at. And being mindful of the fact that diversity has increased over the years, but at the lower ranks, one reason is because of years of service, but there are other systemic things that we need to look at. So we are looking at both the promotional process, opportunities for mentoring, and deployment strategies. The other thing that I would just note that we're struggling with systemically are the non-respondents with respect to diversity statistics. So when I look at, for example, the inspectors group and the superintendent group that was just promoted, in each of those groups, more than 80% chose not to respond to the question of their ethnic and racial background. So we certainly always look at perceived race, but it's not always correct. And that actually tells me that we have an internal cultural problem around people not wanting to identify, which I think speaks to broader concerns as well. So I can tell you that when you look at things like, deployment in terms of where people are going, what is it that they get the opportunity to do, and mentoring, there's tremendous opportunity within the service. We would expect these numbers to grow, and the fact that we're keeping them and looking at them and having these conversations is an important place to start, because I do agree there is a disparity there. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy.
And if I could just add thanks, Shauna, for that. It's one of the comments when I've had meetings with our BISN, and it's about opportunity in the organization, particularly in specialized areas. And so one of the reasons, and one of my goals this year directed down to the command, and I'll just get Deputy Demke to read it. It really speaks to creating a policy to reduce specifically on tenure, and to create opportunities for more people, more of our visible minorities in the people in the organization that have opportunities in those specialized positions, which then give them opportunities to be more successful in the promotion process. So Myron, can I just ask you to just read that goal, please?
Yes, Chief, thank you. The goal reads as follows: champion a strategy for Specialized Operations Command as it relates to recruitment, selection, retention, and tenure of personnel. The development of this strategy will include a partnership with human resources to ensure alignment with best practices and an equity framework. And I'll just follow up with just explaining very quickly the specialized functions, of course, predominantly outside of divisional policing, lives in this command. So that's why it's targeting this particular command. But the radiating impact, of course, will be on the development of people who enter and apply to Specialized Operations Command.
Okay, thank you. Those are our comments.
Board members, any other questions?
Yeah, Chair Hart, I have a question.
Mr. Morgan, go right ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm just trying to get an understanding because I know some of these numbers seem sort of dated. This is from 2018. I've asked you know, a number of times in terms of sort of the plan, the strategy. So in terms of looking at our, you know, our issues around diversity and collecting that information. I'm just wondering, is there a definite timeline to be able to provide some more updated information that speaks to some of what we've been asking for, or what I've been asking for several meetings now? So I'm just wondering if there is some timelines that could be provided, given that this is something that we all are concerned with, and all want to come to a sort of a collective solution. So is there a plan in place, or to provide some definite timelines to provide the statistics that are a little bit more current?
Yeah, actually, I'll just start before I turn it over to Shauna. We definitely have some problems in terms of our data collection, including the volunteering of the information by the membership, which tends to be close to 50% that don't identify, which makes it difficult when we just correlate our data. But I'll let Shauna speak to it and what we're trying to do going forward. Please, Shauna.
Thank you, Chief. Actually, our non-response rates on, so we did a hand survey back in 2017 because our human resources system does not collect this information. So for us to get it, we've had to go out with physical hand surveys. In those hand surveys, the non-response rate was more than 76%. It was approximately 76%. So most people are not filling out this category. That's the one issue. We know the data is incorrect. Secondly, members were told that it would be kept confidential, this information. So we can't provide it. Like, legally, we cannot provide this at a meeting such as this, where it is a public setting, because in certain cases, it would identify the individual with things like sexual orientation or ethnicity, which may not be apparent. So for those reasons, the data is highly inaccurate, extremely problematic. And what I would ask, if respectfully, is if we could have more of a conversation about this at the confidential board meeting, where we might be able to share some specifics, but we cannot do this at a public setting. The challenge is long term going forward, we are working on having our human resource data management system be able to capture whether or not people are interested in disclosing their identity, whatever that is, gender, race, etc. However, even in the promotional processes that we just had, you can see that with respect to superintendent, 80% did not disclose race, and 86% of the inspectors did not disclose race. So we have a culture problem, as I said, around disclosing this, which means that our data is extremely inaccurate. So one, we have a data integrity problem, and two, we have a cultural problem related to people not wanting to disclose it, and three, because of those things combined, and the fact that people were promised confidentiality, and the numbers are so small in terms of people reporting, to disclose it publicly would identify people who have been assured legally that this information will be remained confidential. So those are the three challenges that we're having in the background around not being able to disclose the information from the survey from 2017. So it's old information as well. Those are our challenges.
So thank you for that, and I understand and respect those challenges. I guess my question, with that understanding, what is the plan with all of those challenges that you just mentioned? What is the plan to be able to provide the information that it can be in a public setting that doesn't compromise the members, but however still allows for a transparent process and accountability to the public? So I'm just trying to figure out if there's something from the board's side that we can be doing further to support that, and where is the expectation that we go from here?
Well, I think it's a really important question, and I'm glad that you're asking it. Please don't think that it doesn't mean that we don't want this information. We do, for all the reasons that the mayor just brought up with respect to our promotional process. We can't look at systemic issues without having robust information in this space. So the first thing will be having the system reconfigured, and this is not going to be a small task, it's a larger task, around having the information be able to be captured, where people would actually go in and input information about themselves. The bigger challenge with that will be a robust change management program and culture change program, really, throughout the organization to make people feel comfortable so that they can disclose. And then thirdly, once we have enough numbers in that system to be able to give an aggregate accounting, and we may have to start, for example, by pillar or by command, as opposed to by unit, because then that way we can be assured that nobody would be identified. So that's the plan going forward. The biggest challenge in that is the technological changes that are going to be required to our system, even to just begin that process. That makes sense.
And if I could just jump in, sir, what I wanted to say, I just wanted to emphasize the point Shauna made, that I think it's very important that we're going to have to do some internal messaging to get our membership more prepared to buy into this issue. And we are working on a plan to try to develop that, and we will be bringing it to the March confidential board meeting to discuss that specifically with you. In addition to that, the final comment I'd make is I'm just really proud of the work that's been done on both the inspectors and superintendent process that we've had. That's really been I think really much more of a reflection of our service and the community in terms of the promotions. And it's really creating an opportunity in the organization for enhanced mentorship going forward. And I think, quite frankly, the future leadership opportunities in the organization are very bright. So I just wanted to add that finally. But we will have, as I said, a plan for you at the March confidential.
Thank you very much, Chief, and Deputy Constant. Thank you.
Any other questions, board members?
I'll move the recommendation.
I want to get the speakers first, Vice Chair, very quickly. Anyone wish to speak to this? Some already have. I just have a couple of comments just for future reports. Chief, I know we've spoken about this report already, but I think it would be important in the future maybe to roll some numbers together, because when you look at the 2019 sergeant promotional process and you look at the 2018 staff sergeant and you look at them individually, the numbers are very different than if you look at them collectively. So when I look at them collectively, in terms of actual promotions, it still points to some questions that we definitely have to answer. In terms of success, 8% of Black applicants were successful, 5% of Korean were successful, 7% of Southeast Asian were successful. Now, some of those applicant pools are smaller, so small changes in numbers skew results dramatically. Then when I look at the other end of the spectrum, 21% of Chinese applicants were successful, 22% of West Asian and West African were successful, and 22% of white applicants were successful, all very similar numbers. So, I mean, one of the big challenges in all of this has been raised already. These two charts, 44% of individuals on these two charts chose not to respond, which is a huge number. And as I've mentioned before, Chief, when you look at this level in the organization, staff sergeant and sergeant, these are the leaders of the organization. And one would think that individuals that are applying for leadership positions would be the most likely individuals to comply and fill out forms and identify. So it's concerning to me, and I noticed you, Chief, that the leaders of our organization aren't complying. And I think we really need to take a look at why that is, because at the end of the day, we want statistics that are statistically relevant. And when you have 44% of individuals on these two charts that didn't fill out any forms or didn't self-identify, it makes these numbers statistically irrelevant, frankly. So a bit of work to be done, but looking forward to hearing more about it in March. And I guess on top of that, you're absolutely correct. You know, the recent promotional processes have reflected on the TPS much better than some of these older numbers. But that's all I have to say on that. So can I have a motion to approve this item? I guess to receive rather. Motion to receive. Mayor Tory, seconded by Vice Chair Nunziata. All in favor? Any opposed? That item is carried. That was our last item on the agenda. Could I have a motion to adjourn? Ms. Kostaka, seconder. Mr. Morgan, all in favor? That's carried. The next meeting of the Toronto Police Service Board will be on Tuesday, March the 23rd. See you all then. Thank you very much.